Imagine finding a perfectly preserved child mummy, looking as though they've just curled up for a nap, only to discover they were left on a mountaintop 500 years ago deliberately and drugged and frozen as sacrifice. This is the reality of archaeology in Peru. From the coastal Moche people's ritual slaughter of warriors to the Inca tradition of capacocha, where the purest children were offered to the gods, this country's ruins are filled with truly unsettling stories. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, because this is our journey into the most scary and bizarre archaeological discoveries from Peru.
The temple that fed on flesh.
They were left face down, hands tied with rope, necks strangled. There were no grave goods, no ceramics or jewelry or dignity. These people were sacrificed to long-lost gods at a temple left for us to find over 2,300 years later.
The temple of Puemape has started whispering again, and the story it tells isn't of peace offerings or gentle passings. It's a tale of blood, ritual, and a belief system that demanded human lives.
Welcome to ancient Peru's northern coast, where archaeologists have stumbled onto one of the most direct, harrowing pieces of evidence for organized human sacrifice in South American prehistory. At least 12 individuals, violently discarded with clinical indifference, were found surrounding a temple that hadn't been used for centuries. And I'm kind of convinced it's probably haunted. How could it not be?
Huacas and ghosts.
The Temple of Puemape, built by the Salinar culture around 1000 BC, was supposedly out of commission by the time these sacrifices took place, as in it was supposed to have been abandoned.
But like that one coworker who just won't leave after quitting, the site stayed spiritually relevant long after its prime, and long after the Salinar culture was a footnote in history. Radiocarbon dating pins the sacrifice window between 400 and 200 BC, well after the temple's heyday. This wasn't a case of people stumbling across ruins and thinking, nice place for a picnic and a ritual murder. No, the temple remained a huaca, aka a sacred space. Even after the people who built it departed, the site remained humming with ancestral energy and divine gravity, and it drew later cultures to it, and those cultures used the site for bloody sacrifices.
Because apparently it demanded tribute. The staircase, the stone walls, the cemented plaza all frame a scene of ritual violence. These weren't wartime executions. There were no weapons buried with the victims, and they weren't left in heroic poses. In fact, they were left in some pretty gruesome poses. If you were hoping for a gentle death and a nice send-off, ancient Puemape was not the place to be.
Most of the victims were found lying face down, an immediate red flag in Andean funerary tradition, or any funerary tradition for that matter. Being buried with your face in the dirt typically meant you were despised by whoever buried you. It was the international sign of disrespect.
Even worse, their hands were tied behind their backs, ropes still looped around their necks. Their skulls show evidence of blunt force trauma, and their limbs showed fractures that don't come from accidental tumbles.
But perhaps the most chilling detail of all is that not a single offering was found. Like I said, no ceramics were left with the dead, not one bead or even a symbolic guinea pig. The dead were stripped of not just life, but identity. This is a little strange because even in the world of ritual sacrifice, people were typically treated with respect. They were killed, but often as gifts to the gods. Many people even volunteered, as it was considered a divine act to die in service to the gods.
But not here. These people were sacrificed, yes, but it was more like whoever did it went the extra mile. So who were they? Locals punished for crossing the wrong deity or crossing the street without waiting for the light? Captives dragged from other valleys to feed the gods?
Experts don't know yet, but they might soon. Ongoing DNA sequencing and osteological analysis may unmask the victims' origins, revealing whether they were native to the region or imported specifically for ritual purposes, like sacred cargo with no return ticket. A stage for sacrifice.
Archaeologists found something almost as horrifying as the bones. The layout of the temple was designed specifically for murder.
A broad staircase led to a gathering space large enough to accommodate a crowd, and stone block walls defined the space with theatrical precision. Make no mistake, this was a stage and the victims were the cast. The audience probably crunched on snacks while watching flesh become an offering. Beyond the grimness of it, this discovery rewires our modern understanding of sacrifice in ancient Peru. While human offerings have been documented in lots of Andean cultures like the Moche and the Inca, this Puemabe massacre is one of the earliest, most brutal cases on record.
Meaning there's no debating what happened here. It was absolutely sacrifice. Experts are calling it one of the strongest archaeological examples of mass sacrificial violence in pre-Columbian Peru. Not bad for a temple that had supposedly shut down centuries earlier. Now, how would you feel about moving on to some other skeletons? Perhaps skeletons of the gods.
Skulls of the descendants of the gods.
They came out of the ground like something from a horror movie. Elongated heads, red hair, missing skull sutures, eyes too big, cheekbones sharp enough to slice through a block of cheese.
When Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello went digging in the Paracas Desert in 1928 and uncovered more than 300 of these cranial oddities, he found more than an ancient graveyard. He found remnants of a culture that would shake the earth, kicking off a century-long fight over who these people were, where they came from, and whether or not they were entirely human.
Now, thanks to a few dusty samples, some Canadian lab techs in gloves, and one very determined fringe theorist wielding a Dremel drill and a Bible, the debate has mutated into something far stranger than the skulls themselves. Let's dig in, shall we? Your entire worldview might be about to change. The Paracas Peninsula in Peru, with its sun-blasted cliffs and angry wind, doesn't look like a place where civilization would thrive. But underneath its parched skin lay a necropolis stuffed with the most extreme examples of cranial elongation on Earth.
These weren't your run-of-the-mill cradle-boarded skulls, which can be found all across the planet. Everyone from the Huns to the Egyptians practiced cranial modification at some point in history, but not like in Peru. Some of the skulls that Julio found looked like they'd been halfway stretched into giraffes. Others resembled upside-down ice cream cones sculpted by aliens with a soft spot for cheekbones. Julio Tello's 1928 discovery revealed tombs elaborately constructed for people who had clearly elevated the head shape game to a spiritual art form. He found over 300 skulls, some dating back 3,000 years, which was centuries before the Inca Empire and centuries before Christ.
What I'm telling you is that these skulls are old, and from the very start, they raised one big, fat, deformed question. Were these heads made, or were they born this way? Because for some, the Paracas skulls aren't the result of cranial deformation. They are 100% alien.
The foramen magnum. The enthusiasm of a TSA agent explaining confiscated shampoo argue that the Paracas skulls are an example of classic cranial deformation. You take a newborn, bind the skull with cloth or wood, and let time and biology do the rest. The pressure of the bound skull forces it to grow oblong.
Cultures from Mesoamerica to Melanesia have done it. Fashion hurts, no mystery here. Except the Paracas skulls weren't playing by the usual rules. L.A. Marzulli, author and researcher, pointed out several anatomical weirdnesses that make the Paracas collection look more like cranial anomalies than deformations.
First off, there's the foramen magnum, that critical hole where your spine plugs into your skull. Everyone has one, and they are all in the same place. Except on the Paracas skulls, who had their foramen magnum way too far back. Way back. Like so far back that scientists suspect whoever the skulls belonged to were not designed to walk upright on two legs.
Yeah, digest that. The foramen magnum suggests that these were humans of completely different proportions than us.
Also, some skulls lacked the sagittal suture altogether. Assuming you're not all doctors, the sagittal suture is the seam where the two parietal plates usually fuse. You know the line on a freshly polished skull that looks sort of like a sewing seam? That's the sagittal suture, and the Paracas skulls are all missing theirs. That's not just an oops. That's a foundational flaw in the design of these people. Either they all suffered from an extremely rare pathology known as craniosynostosis, or they literally were not human.
Marzulli said, and I quote, "This is not cradle headboarding. This is genetic. Marzulli is convinced the Paracas skulls were totally natural. But if the skulls were natural, were their owners humans, aliens, mutants, or a mix?
The lab results.
Let's talk science. Real science, because we can speculate and guess and listen to alien theories all day because it's fun. But at the end of the day, science gets the final say.
In the early 2010s, Marzulli and his team acquired samples from several Paracas skulls. Samples as in hair, bone powder, and even a full skull from a U.S. private collection. Protective clothing was worn, samples were drilled through the foramen magnum, and material was sent to labs in Canada and the U.S. But here's the sneaky part. The labs weren't told what the samples were. They just knew they were ancient. The scientists weren't given any info about where they came from or that they might belong to the actual Nephilim from the Bible. All they knew was that they were dating mummy samples.
The results were so insane, so unexpected that people are still fighting against them today.
Of the samples that could be sequenced, 3 had mitochondrial haplogroup H2A. This is a pretty standard group found in Eastern European people, so not exactly normal for ancient Peru. You know, before they ever had any contact with Europeans.
One of the samples had mitochondrial haplogroup T2b, typical to the Middle East, Mesopotamia, and Syria. Some later tests reported H1A and U2E groups, both of which can be found around the Black Sea and the Caspian regions.
What does all of this mean? It means that these people were not from Peru. They were Eurasian, hailing from the general area of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So how in the world did they get to Peru 3,000 years ago?
And why did they all have red hair?
2 independent hair experts have examined the samples and found that many Paracas skulls had naturally red or even blonde hair. And to reinforce the whole not from around here narrative, the Paracas skulls had hair genetically thin, measuring 30% finer than native South American hair. This unusual trait further complicates the narrative. Red hair is rare globally, but shows strong roots in Western Eurasia, supporting barbers and brides from across the Atlantic. And this was long before the Vikings ever hit Newfoundland.
Could it be that there was a transatlantic trading network before anyone was supposed to have even seen the Americas? Or is there a more religious explanation?
Then there were Nephilim.
This wouldn't be a Paracas skull story without a little biblical thunder, so you better prepare yourself. Marzulli has a theory, and that theory is that the Paracas people were the Nephilim.
Yes, those Nephilim, the semi-divine hybrids born of fallen angels and human women, as mentioned in Genesis 6:4 and 1,000 YouTube comment sections. According to this view, the Paracas were the ancient descendants of celestial mischief. But wait, I hear you say, the Nephilim were giants, right? Sure, but not their descendants. Let's assume for the sake of argument that some of the Nephilim survived the flood, or at least some of the children they had with human women survived. Remember, this is just a theory.
Okay, so a few not-so-giant Nephilim offspring possibly survived the flood by clinging to the top of Everest, something like that. Then what happened?
The idea is that a small group of Nephilim descendants ended up in Peru simply trying to survive, and to survive in a world of humans who hated them.
These Nephilim descendants would have been very easy to recognize thanks to their giant oblong-shaped skulls, like a zebra trying to blend in at a lion convention.
And while it's easy to dismiss this theory as religious lunacy, the science actually backs it up. The DNA of the Paracas people points to the Levant, the same zone where Nephilim were stomping around in biblical times, according to the Bible. If you're still skeptical, I get it, but Marzulli isn't quite as understanding. Here's another quote from the guy in response to his theories being questioned. He says, "Don't mock the man, mock the method. Go down to Peru, pull your own samples, pay your own lab fees, then come back with something better."
I think Marzulli is a little defensive about his process, but you have to admit he's done a ton of work. And based on the results of his work, he thinks the Paracas people were descendants of biblical giants. It sounds crazy to some, but to Marzulli, it is a proven fact. I can't say who's right or wrong, but if you want to leave your opinions in the comments, I will gladly read it. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe.
The hidden drug chambers of the Chavín. In the cold Andean highlands of Peru, 10,000 feet above sea level and 2,500 years removed from our present-day sensibilities, a handful of ancient elites gathered in secret underground stone chambers. What were they doing in these dark underground pits? They weren't there to discuss trade policy or irrigation logistics, but to inhale reality-warping drugs through hollowed-out bird bones. Sounds like a party, but this is archaeology, and the ruins offer a shocking glimpse into the drug-fueled rituals of one of Peru's most enigmatic cultures. These are the ruins of Chavín de Huántar. Bring a torch, a sense of awe, and maybe something to bite down on once the DMT kicks in. Psychedelic power. For centuries, the monumental site of Chavín de Huántar has whispered secrets to archaeologists, but now, those whispers are sounding more like bass-throated chants echoing from deep within the Andes. Experts finally have physical evidence that Chavín elites weren't just architects and priests, they were also a little crazy for hallucinogenic drugs. Inside a small subterranean chamber, archaeologists uncovered dozens of snuff tubes fashioned from animal bones. If you're not sure what a snuff tube is, good on you. Picture rolled up $100 bills for going full Charlie Sheen, but made of delicate bird bones. The elite priests used the hollow bones for sniffing the ancient equivalent of cosmic rocket fuel. Chemical analysis of the snuff tubes revealed residues of vilca, a DMT-rich hallucinogen so potent it could convince you the stone walls were melting and the ancestral gods were trapped inside your head. Also present was nicotine, which in pre-Columbian rituals served more as a spiritual amplifier than a casual vice. There's not much evidence of everyday tobacco use, but it was definitely used during intense rituals, possibly to enhance the effects of the psychoactive drugs. What was going on inside these dark chambers were exclusive, orchestrated rituals, like psychoactive VIP lounges for those at the top of the Chavín hierarchy. And by the way, who were the Chavín? The Chavín civilization flourished between 900 and 200 BC, long before the Inca, long before Machu Picchu, and long before the war on drugs. They were around at the same time roughly as the Paracas culture. They just lived in different parts of Peru, with the Chavín dominating the northern regions. Chavín de Huántar was one of their greatest cities, but more than a city, it was a ceremonial vortex home to monumental temples crowned with feline fangs. It had carvings of human-animal hybrids mid-transformation, and even a network of tunnels so intricate it makes Derinkuyu look like a backyard sinkhole. This was the spiritual capital of the Andes, and its most sacred rituals were like a day at Woodstock. 69, not 99. Archaeologist Daniel Contreras described the rituals as tightly controlled experiences, in which ingesting the divine was accessible only to the social elite. Only those with status and power were allowed into the underground tunnels to go on their journey, let's call it. After all, if your ruler just spent the night speaking with gods, who are you to question his tax policy? But getting a nose full of strange substances and talking to the gods might not have been as much fun as you're thinking. In fact, archaeologists suggest the participants may have been terrified while being led into the underground chambers. It would have been like descending into a haunted house at a carnival. There were strange images of snarling gods on the walls. Someone's blowing smoke in your face, the drugs kick in and the walls start talking. I don't know, I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it. Daniel Contreras and his team argue that these psychoactive rituals helped Peru shift from small egalitarian communities to sprawling, class-divided societies. Think of it as a chemical origin story for inequality. The people who controlled the sacred hive wore gold, built stone monuments, and snorted hallucinogens in candlelit crypts. Meanwhile, everyone else watched in reverence and probably a bit of confusion. The idea is that by controlling these psychoactive substances, and by controlling who can get high and who can't under the guise of who is allowed to commune with the gods, they accidentally helped form a hierarchical society. If you wanted to climb the ladder in Chavín society, you had to be invited into the chamber where gods appeared in the haze of smoke, and you absolutely could not say anything embarrassing mid-trip or forget that promotion. This discovery confirms what scientists always suspected about the Chavín, that a drug-induced stupor tripped them into starting modern society. Drugs were central to this culture's spirituality, their politics, their mythology, and their upward mobility. The hidden chamber, the bone tubes, and the DMT and nicotine cocktail were all part of a larger narrative where mind-altering experiences became tools of governance, and they were also responsible for what must have been some very terrifying trips that made a lot of people not want anything to do with politics. The heroic dead. Peru's coastal desert doesn't look like a battlefield. It looks like somewhere battlefields go to retire. If you've ever seen this place with your own eyes, you'll know it's dusty, sun-scorched, and all but forgotten. Yet beneath that sleepy crust of sand, a grave has been waiting to tell a story. Not of conquest, but of honor, and of a civilization that refused to vanish quietly under the Inca shadow. In October 2024, a team led by Professor Joseph Zajkulski broke ground in southern Peru's Atico River Valley, and when they did, they cracked open a mystery. Located in El Curaca Archaeological Zone, just a few miles from the Pacific Ocean, they uncovered a circular stone tomb housing 24 skeletons. These were the skeletons of men, women, and children, all expertly bundled in woven textiles like fashionable mummies. They were also laid to rest with offerings of corn cobs, ceramics, carved wood, and bone tools. But these weren't ordinary burials, and this wasn't an ordinary death toll. These were people who had died violently, even more violently than usual in ancient Peru. Some suffered from slash wounds as if they'd fought a samurai. Others had crushed bones, possibly pulverized by barbaric blunt weapons. No matter the cause of death, each victim had died in a very up-close and personal battle. Each victim was marked by savage trauma. And whatever battle killed these folks, they were given excellent burials. Burials so fancy that I think these people may have been heroes, maybe even like Leonidas and his 300. The Chuquibamba. These people are known today as the Chuquibamba, but they are yet another of Peru's marvelously fascinating ancient cultures. Flourishing between 1000 and 1450 AD, the Chuquibamba, also called Aruni in some records, lived in the long shadow of the Andes and the even longer shadow of the Inca. Both existed at the same time, but the Inca were up in the highlands building mountaintop sanctuaries, while the Chuquibamba were chilling at the beach. Whereas the Inca left behind fortresses, highways, and strange stone doorways that may have been portals, the Chuquibamba left behind actually not much. They're very elusive and endlessly frustrating for archaeologists. Until now, most of what experts knew about them came from fragments, things like faded petroglyphs etched into Andean caves or isolated ceramics in river valleys. Their story was written in puzzle pieces with no box to show what the final picture should be, and all the dang pieces are green. As you can imagine, it's been a tough puzzle to solve. Luckily, El Curaca changed that. These burials prove to be so insightful that they are rewriting the history of this lost civilization. The grave goods found alongside the skeletons are a catalog of Chuquibamba life and belief. Their pottery, which is dark red with black stylized lines, bore images of prehistoric alpaca, birds, and abstract starbursts. It's the visual language of a people attuned to their environment, weaving the cosmos and the mountains into every cup and bowl. But the textiles... Wow, the textiles were masterpieces. Woven from animal fiber, most likely alpaca, their cloth boasted intricate patterns layered in vibrant color. One bag, believed to be a coca leaf pouch, had such complex motifs that early researchers thought it was Inca, but it wasn't. It was Chuquibamba. That confusion speaks volumes about how overlooked this culture has been. Thankfully, these bones are putting them back in the spotlight. And what bones they are! Archaeologists use 3D scanning to analyze the fractures, punctures, and cuts on each skull and ribcage. The wounds are definitely from blunt force impacts and blade strikes. Many appear to be defensive injuries, such as a person raising their arms to protect their face from a furious sword slash. Almost sounds like they were the losers, right? But apparently these people may not have died in defeat. Professor Zajkulski believes they were killed in a victorious battle. The team's working theory is that this was not a grave for the fallen of a massacre, but a memorial for those who secured a triumph, sort of like Flanders Fields in Belgium, only Chuquibamba style. These may have been brave heroes, but who did they fight? Were they coastal rivals, early Inca expansionists, a neighboring culture trying to erase Chuquibamba identity? And another thing, Why bury women and children alongside the warriors? Were they also fighters? Or were they the family members? Were they victims of a last stand deemed worthy enough to be immortalized in the hero graveyard? If you have any thoughts to share about these ancient warriors, let me know in the comments. The Knife-Wielding Spider God. In a dusty corner of Peru's La Libertad region, some farmers tried to extend their avocado and sugarcane plantations. When they did, their heavy machines got into a fight with ancient history. The farmers accidentally destroyed about 60% of an ancient site dating back more than 3,000 years. The 40% they didn't destroy turned out to be the mud brick bones of a forgotten temple. A temple dedicated to what might just be the scariest ancient god ever. On the wall of this forgotten sacred place, painted in ochre, is a spider. A giant spider god wielding a knife. And while the experts say it was probably a water deity, I have another idea. I suspect the spider god might be related to Aiapaic, also known as the Decapitator. The mural of the spider god was found on a 50-foot-long adobe shrine named Tomabalito, tucked in the Peru province along Peru's northern coast. It dates to the Cupisnique culture of about 3,200 years ago. They were a civilization that flourished long before the Moche. They existed even earlier than the Paracas, when the Andes were writing their first chapters in blood, rain, and myth. The mural itself is stunning, even in its ruined state. Stylized and animalistic, it shows a spider wielding what appears to be a ritual knife known as a tumi, something the violent gods of the Moche were later depicted holding. Archaeologist Regulo Hortan believes the temple was built near a river because it likely served as a water shrine, a ceremonial hub that came alive during the rainy season between January and March. That was when the highland waters flowed down the mountains and people all over the region celebrated. Water meant growing crops, and crops meant life. So where do spiders come into play? Spiders, in many Andean cultures, symbolize water. They also symbolize fertility and the cycle of renewal. Their webs caught dew. Their emergence from the ground signaled the coming of rain. Weirdly enough, spiders do make convincing water gods. But this particular spider brought something more than moisture. It brought teeth, blades, and the possibility of blood. The fact that the temple's mural features no grave goods and no offerings suggests it was not the typical water shrine found in the area. It likely had a more nefarious purpose. The blade in the spider's hairy leg or arm, whatever you want to call it, the knife hints at something much darker than an 8-legged Poseidon. The Phantom of Aiapaic. A few centuries after the Cupisnique faded into history, on the very same coast, the Moche civilization rose to power. The Moche were arguably the most theatrically violent of all pre-Incan cultures. They thrived on violence and erected temples to truly scary gods. Their most important deity, possibly a creator god, was Aiapaic, also sometimes known as Wrinkled Face. Don't ask me why, though. Aiapaic didn't really have a face. The god was depicted most often as a mutant spider, usually with 8 legs, the body of an arachnid, an anthropomorphic face, and the fangs of a jaguar. Aiapaic was also depicted holding a half-moon-shaped knife called a tumi, but not always. For some reason, Aiapaic was depicted on ceramic objects holding his own head as serpents explode from his cranium like Medusa's hair extensions. The parallels between the knife-wielding god found at the temple and Aiapaic are enough to make you wonder if we are dealing with the same god. The Cupisnique culture may have come up with the original spider god idea, with its links to water, sacrifice, and agricultural fertility. Then the Moche may have supercharged the god centuries later, turning a simple spider deity into a war god with a thirst for skulls and heads. I haven't even mentioned the most disturbing part about Aiapaic yet. Remember before I said that Aiapaic is sometimes known as the Decapitator? He had that nickname because whenever someone was sacrificed, their head was offered as a gift to Aiapaic. He was a headhunter in the literal sense, a god who actually demanded the severed heads of his enemies. And you thought the Old Testament God was vengeful, but not even God demanded decapitations. All the iconographic fingerprints match. Spider with a knife? Check. Association with the rain? Check. Temple near a river? Check. Ominous silence instead of grave goods? Check and double check. It's as if the Kupisnike created a god, made him popular, and then he was cancelled. Years later, when the Moche came along, they rebooted the god, gave him a spiffy new name, and shifted him from water to blood. For now, the spider god's temple is protected only by caution tape and hope. Because the COVID-19 pandemic was a major issue at the time of discovery, full excavations had to be paused, and the mural was covered up again. Now scientists are hoping to get back out there to learn more about the god and his temple. The site is officially registered, which means that future archaeologists can return with better tools, bigger questions, and maybe the smoking gun that connects the mystery spider to Ayapaic's obsession with human heads. And there's still the fact that the site was 60% destroyed by the farmers, all in the name of avocado. The tragedy of the temple's partial destruction reminds us just how fragile our access to ancient truths really is. It makes you think how many other temples, castles, fortresses, villages, whatever, were destroyed by farmers desperate for more land. One bulldozer can erase history with the briefest push of a pedal, while a single field of cash crops can overwrite 3,000 years of cultural and religious evolution. So the next time you see a spider skitter across your ceiling in the middle of a thunderstorm, don't reach for a shoe. Offer a prayer just in case. Thanks for watching! What was your favorite discovery from Peru? Let me know if you'd like to see a part 2. There's plenty more where that came from. Be sure to subscribe and check out our membership program, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!